This time on Vehicle Garage, roof rack refurbishment. If you've got an older SUV or car, one of the things that typically gets weathered the most as it sits outside under the sun is the roof rack. Something most people typically overlook when they're detailing a car. So on today's video, I'm going to remove the roof rack from my S10 Blazer and work on making it look like new again. So here's a better shot that you can see just how faded and weathered this roof rack has become, with the paint peeling and chipping off on the middle bars, and then the side bars, while their paint is still intact, they're very, very faded, as well as the plastic end caps here. So the first step is going to be to remove the roof rack. Most of them should be attached in pretty much the same way. In my case, there are 2 Torx bolts at each corner that need to be removed, and then the roof rack can come off. Okay, now the bolts have been removed. It's time to remove the roof rack from the car. Pretty easy once it's unbolted. Just remember, if this has been sitting out in the sun, it's going to be pretty hot. So now that I've got the roof rack off the car, the next step is going to be disassembling the roof rack itself. In my case, the first thing to take off here are these rubber strips that go across the top, and this protects the channel that has the sliding nuts for you to be able to attach things to the roof rack here. So remove the rubber and set it aside. There's one in the front and there's one in the back. So for this, I'm just using a trim removal tool, but a large flathead screwdriver or small pry bar should work pretty well also. Just need to get it under the side there and try not to tear the rubber. My plan is to reuse these pieces if I can. Get that up out of the groove there and then just peel it back. Alright, now that those strips are out, we'll flip this over. Because on my roof rack, each end piece, which is plastic, is screwed on with a Phillips head screwdriver, and then each crossbar has 2 Phillips head screws on the sides. So this should come apart into about 8 pieces, I believe. And I'm going to do this the easy way. I was mistaken. These are Torx bolts on the end caps as well. Okay, so we'll do the Torx first. And these are apparently not the same size as the T25s that we're holding this in to the car. I think these are going to be T15. Yep, T15 for the end caps. There's 1, 2, and then these should just slide out of there. Yep, just like that. Alright, 2 down, 2 to go. Okay, now those are out. Now to take the crossbars off. Okay, the last step here on disassembly is to take all the pieces out of the side rails here. Should have 1 or 2 of these tie-down loops that you can unscrew, and then the end pieces here that just unscrew. And then you're going to slide that whole thing out of there. Same thing with both of these. Don't need to unscrew them all the way because there's a backing plate there that you don't want to fall out. It's not that big of a deal, but it's just easier if it stays on there. And then the other end piece. So there it is, fully disassembled. There are, I don't remember if I showed this before or not, but there are 4 nut plates in each of the crossbars here. You can take those out. I'm just going to go ahead and leave those in place because I don't plan to paint inside on the rail here. I'm going to put a piece of tape back over. Basically, where the rubber piece was, maybe just inside of that. And then once that's taped off, I will spray this. But before I can start spraying parts, I need to clean everything up and then sand it down. Oh, and one other thing. I had trouble originally getting my roof rack off, and I ended up drilling out a little bit of a groove in this back end cap here. I was just going to leave it, but since I want this to look really nice when I'm all finished, I'm going to take a little bit of Bondo and fill in that spot and then smooth it down and then paint it. So if you do have any blemishes in the plastic end caps, this is a great time to fix that as well. So now it's time for, you know, my favorite activity, sanding stuff. Okay, so here's the end cap that I want to make a repair to. I was going to use Bondo to fill in the hole right there, but unfortunately the Bondo I have is old and completely hard as a rock, so I do have some of this JB Weld plastic bonder, so I'm going to try to mix up some of this and use that instead. Well, it turns out this was dried out as well, or at least half of it is. I cannot get any to come out at all, and it seems hard as a rock, so I need to either go buy another tube of this or go get some more Bondo before I can fill that in. So alright, well, I went ahead and decided to get another tube of JB Weld plastic bonder to try to fill this in. It was just a little bit cheaper than getting another big tub of Bondo, so I'm going to mix up a little bit of this, fill in the hole, and then sand it and paint it. Here's the end cap after being filled in with the epoxy and then sanded down. It's not going to focus, but there's a tiny little pinhole there where this would have been probably a little bit nicer finish to use Bondo and or some finishing putty filler for that little bitty hole. What I'm going to do on this one that I didn't do on the others is go ahead and put a couple coats of primer in this spot and then sand that down just a little bit more and then put the satin black paint on there. Here it is again after several coats of primer and some more sanding. It is a little better than it was, still not perfect. I think I'm going to leave it at this and go ahead and spray some black and get this painted up. And as always, like with any of this kind of paint and body type work, you can make it as perfect as you want. Since it's the roof rack, a few little tiny blemishes aren't going to be that big of a deal, at least to me. But if you want to make it completely perfect, you can. Just going to have to spend some more time filling and sanding and priming and doing all that. So anyway, top coat. Here are the side rails and the crossbars all cleaned up, sanded down, and the crossbars are taped off here in the channels that I don't want paint to get into. So this is ready to go. The other thing you definitely want to think about before you go about painting something like this is what you want the finish to look like. In this case, I've chosen the satin finish, but of course you can get a matte finish or a semi-gloss finish depending on how you want this to turn out. And just like any time you're painting something, just going to start off with a couple of very light coats. Also, another side note, if you wanted to get really technical here and do everything completely properly, you should prime this. There is technically a little bit of a height difference between the bare aluminum and the old paint, but since I've sanded everything with 240 grit, I think that's good enough for what I need. It's going to look a hell of a lot better than it looked before. Again, not really going for any kind of full coverage here. Just a real nice light coat to start with. Okay, first coat is done, so we're gonna let that flash for, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes and then come back and hit it with another light coat. Okay, that's two medium to light coats. Now I'm gonna flip all of these pieces over and basically do the same thing on the back. Then I'm going to flip them back and then do one or probably two medium to heavy final top coats on the top surfaces here. The last thing here are going to be all the plastic parts. I thought about painting all of these, but I think what I'm going to do is just clean them up with some soap and water and then use some Meguiar's back to black and try to bring them back a little bit. I did test that on one of the knobs so far and it definitely looks better. Just don't think these are worth trying to paint all of this, especially the connecting pieces, because we don't want that paint buildup. So I'm going to try the back to black and rejuvenate the plastic a little bit that way, and then if that turns out well, I will put it all back together. Oh, and I'm going to fully disassemble these pieces as well, so unscrew it till the nut plate comes out. Drop that out and then separate everything. All right, here are all the plastic connector pieces and the knobs for adjustment and the tie down loops and all of the little plastic parts here that I'm not going to paint. So I'm just going to get started putting a couple coats of back to black on them and hopefully bring them back a little bit. I did do this one already, which I don't know if you can tell on camera. It does look slightly better. It's not a huge improvement, but it is better. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to the rest of them here, and then it should be ready to put back together. Alright, well again, I don't know if that's coming through very well on video, but everything definitely looks better. Gonna let it sit for a while, come back, wipe. Okay, I lied. A couple more things to do to finish this all up here. One of them is these are the pads that go underneath the end caps. So these need to get the same treatment that the rest of the plastic parts got, need to get washed up, and then I'm going to hit them with some back to black as well. And same thing for both of the rubber strips that go across the top of the crossbars. Also, another side note, these pads were in pretty decent condition on my car here. None of them are broken, they're just a little faded. But I did decide to go ahead and work on 3D printing some new pieces, so check back in the future for a video on that. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and clean these up and put the originals back on the car for now. Alright, all of these pieces are now cleaned up and ready to go. Just a couple more things that I would recommend doing before you put everything back. I've got all of the screws here for the roof rack, and what I'm going to do, because these are, if you can see here on video, these are a little bit corroded, a little bit rusty. Not terrible, but a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and chase all of the threads with my tap and die set for the screws, and I'm also going to do the same thing on the car before I go ahead and reattach the roof rack, just to make sure that everything goes back together easily, and then hopefully will also come back apart easily if I ever have to take this off and do this again or do any other work on the roof rack. So this will be pretty simple. Just have the right tap and die set, and then each bolt will get chased like that. So I'm going to knock these out, and then we will reassemble the roof rack, and then it's ready to go back on the car. Okay, let's get started putting this thing back together. Just make sure you pay attention when you're doing this. If it's like mine, some of these parts are specific to which end they go on. So these are for the front, and these are for the back. You can see they're a little different there. They're also specific side to side. I almost just put those on the wrong side, so Make sure you pay attention. Let's go ahead and reinstall the rubber strip on the top. And now it's just time for the end caps. Okay, here it is, ready to go back on the car, which I will do as soon as it stops raining. Okay, not ideal, still drizzling a little bit, but the rain's slowed down enough. I think I can get this back up here now. First thing is the pads. Okay. All right, well there it is. It's definitely good to chase out these threads, although a couple of them, I guess I didn't run the tap all the way down, so a couple of these screws aren't getting seated properly, so I do need to redo that. But overall, this looks way better than it did before. I'll try to come out here and get some more beauty shots, final shots, once the sun's back out. All right, well there you have it. A pretty easy project with a pretty big payoff in my opinion. And all I really used for this was about 3/4 of a can of satin black paint, some sandpaper, and some Mother's Back to Black. Make sure you click that thumbs up and like this video if you did. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Leave me a comment down below if you've got something to add, and I will see you next time.